Hello everybody, I'm Chris DeLeon. These days I'm with HomeTeamGameDev.com. 14 some years ago I worked on Boom Blox, which I'm sharing some level design process from today. This won't be ultra specific to Boom Blox, as I'll clarify, right? I'm assuming you're working on other games and focusing on principles here as best I can, but obviously basing it in this particular game's context. Now speaking of which, this is totally unauthorized, like our old strategy guides growing up. This was 2008, it's for the Wii, which of course is a long gone console. The whole team's disbanded. It's honestly not even clear who I would ask for permission. Everybody is somewhere else now doing something else. That said, nothing here is secret, right? There's no proprietary stuff. There's no behind-the-scenes photographs or work-in-progress stuff. It's all stuff you see from the end of the game. It also includes things I've been using in my design process before as well as after my involvement on this project at this company. A few other disclaimers. There is a controversial figure who was involved with the Boom Blox team. Robin Hunicke, if you're familiar with the People Make Games recent videos, she and I did not overlap in time. She joined the team the same day that I left, which is to say I'm not avoiding the topic. I just honestly, it was not part of my experience with the team. I can't speak to it. Just want to acknowledge that up front. Also, I won't be speaking or taking questions about Spielberg's involvement or other people. This is not a history of the team or retro postmortem. It's fundamentally just about design process. Again, my goal being to give you some takeaways you can make applicable to your projects, not assuming that you're just particularly interested in this casual game maybe you played growing up. And I think that these levels I'm showcasing or screenshotting are, for the most part, ones I worked on. It's a little tricky because I worked on over 100, and again, this was a long time ago. We had a number of other designers on the team. There's a whole design department, multiple other designers doing other levels. We were part of a team. I was not the creative director, the lead designer, none of those things. I was a technical game designer on the team, cranking out levels, along with some others in parallel. And this was a particularly unusual project at EA. Part of what excited me about it so much was that we couldn't compare to other game genre stuff that we were in because there wasn't stuff like what we were building yet. When I was on the Medal of Honor team, we could look at other World War II games, including the dozen other previous Medal of Honor games, to get ideas for what players liked and didn't, and what the conventions and expectations were. This was a 2008 game on Wii with casual motion controls, pre-Angry Birds, pre-Castle Crashers we'll talk about, which are kind of things that established that genre later. So we had a lot of thrashing and exploration that was a lot of fun. In a lot of ways, that's actually make the scale closer to what might be applicable for your indie scale projects than your AAA ones, including the fact that we had really, there's a lot of people involved in every single layer of the process, but in this kind of project, one designer could have whole levels, kind of mostly to our name of, I did that layout, someone else made in some other additional details, decorations, and so on, in a way that at the bigger FPS games and so on was not usually a one-person, one-level kind of experience to work on it. Oh, interesting. Part of the slides are not showing. So anyway, I'll figure out why that was. But Boom Blox was a super unusual game for EA, and again, this company, we've been putting out Lord of the Rings games, Command & Conquer games, GoldenEye Rogue Agent, I was not affiliated with that one, a bunch of other kind of, this is action, war, sword, gun games, and so it was a really neat experience to work on something that was kind of a little more youth-oriented, a little more broad demographic, cute animals. This thing was just adorable. I'm having some challenges here of slide parts not sharing. Let me see if I can full screen. You know what, we're just going to do it this way. All right, so there's some screenshots of other past games that we had worked on. And again, this thing was just adorable. Pretty blocks, cute, fun animals, lots of great sounds. Apologies for switching, but, images weren't working here. And this is going to design process talk. It won't be super Boom Blox specific. First, real quick, in case you're missing context for what is Boom Blox, if you're familiar with Angry Birds or Castle Crashers, those games came along a year or two later and did in 2D an exceptional and well-known version of what really Boom Blox was kind of helping to try to innovate in 3D. Which is to say, it's got these precarious physics arrangements of blocks of different sizes, dimensions, and shapes. And the player's objective then is to defeat the animals or to score certain blocks and get certain points, knock down walls, except we did it in 3D. This was also a time of a lot of exploration into what motion controls made possible to us. Again, the console being new, there's a lot of demand for... We had a cursor on the screen, so we had light gun missions like you see in the bottom right. But a lot of it also is kind of Jenga-style, using the grabber hand to yank a block out without disrupting the rest of the tower, or trying to get chain reactions of towers to collide and knock each other down to get the gems all down below a certain altitude. And you'll also see we had some missions I'll show examples of where you're helping a creature by clearing a path through them across a precarious bridge, defending or attacking other little animals in the universe. There are also special blocks in there. So in addition to the physical kinds, the goal blocks and the vanishing blocks, there's also blocks where, like, so these green ones you see, when they come in contact with each other, create a big explosion. And so a lot of our levels are designed around if you could hit it from the right angle with the right force in the right direction, setting off these chain reactions of one tower would connect with another in just the right place to blow up, flinging something into another tower, and then you could clear the whole environment with one big old fireworks spectacle if you could just find like a kind of hole-in-one where to put that shot. So main ideas we're kind of cover today, and I'll go and drill into each one of these for kind of the middle part of our presentation here. But mechanics design, in terms of how important it was for our core fundamental action of the player to help them test their intentions in our universe. System design, in terms of having consistent physics for transfer, so that they could learn one puzzle and apply it to the other ones. This was a non-obvious one that, anyway, strong, close to my heart. Novelty without confusion. This especially because we're trying to design for a youth and a casual audience. A lot of people, Wii was their first console. They're people who didn't really think of themselves as gamers who played a lot of games, but they had a Wii because of Wii Bowling, Wii Sports, and so on. Trying to reduce friction in that progression while still showing them lots of novelty was a neat challenge. Level designing for the groups. The levels happen in sets of small puzzles. And again, this is actually, I think, the same formula that can also apply in a lot of casual games, web games, indie games, smaller puzzle games, even if it's not AAA in scale. In the process, about our fast tools to test more ideas so we could trash a lot, rank, and iterate on stages. So for mechanics design, one of our big choices we had to kind of navigate on the team was, should a throw affect where that ball goes? In terms of if you had the mechanics, the accuracy, the movement of your arm. And one challenge we ran into is a lot of people had this mental model expectation of motion control, where you could suddenly really swing a sword and swing a bat and swing a racket and throw a punch. Shouldn't you be able to throw a ball? And the challenge we ran into was that it's really, really hard to measure that with accelerometers. That's really noisy data. It turns out, there's no gyroscope in those things until you put the adapter that came along later. It's even worse than, say, VR motion controllers. So if your wrist was even slightly turned differently than how somebody else tested or recorded or programmed it, you got a wildly different angle on that throw. And ultimately, this became a big problem. So what we ultimately did was we kind of narrowed it down to measuring the magnitude of your throw. So we kind of distilled it between 3 different big, broad categories of a high-power throw, meaning you really kind of whipped up that G sensor, a medium normal throw, which still connected with enough force to kind of achieve your objective of applying force from that angle on that block, and then kind of too weak, just as feedback to the player of, well, you didn't really throw, you just kind of let go of it, so it sort of dribbles out ineffectively. But even if we had the accelerometer data, I think it wouldn't have been the right choice in terms of, as I think one of our lead multiplayer level designers, Steve Riesenberger, explained it. His kid would be playing these Wii Sports games and wanted to do like the whirlwind swing and all these kind of big gestures that really just translated to, I want to supply more power, but for directing the shot, we let the player just pinpoint with a cursor and say, exactly there, that's where I want the ball to connect, and then we implement it so it had to. If I'm going to pop back to slide order here so I can kind of load these one by one for this, because there's a sequence of the thought process here for the players interacting with the space, where step 1 is inspecting the level from different angles to figure out, okay, what's my theory? I think I should hit it from that side. I should hit this block on the edge of it. That's going to cause this spin or cause this tower to collapse in that direction. Step 2 is they're throwing that ball. And either the ball is going to achieve what they hoped that ball would do or it's not. By which I mean it's either going to hit that mark or it won't. And the problem here is that if it didn't even hit where they were aiming, where they meant, because the throw is trying to be realistic in terms of taking the movement of their arm and dictating the guidance of that ball, their theory still wasn't tested. They're still stuck on this step of wasting another throw from their limited number of throws just to try to test the idea, is this even the right place and angle to hit it? And instead, if the ball does hit where they intend, which again we kind of implemented, so basically it's guaranteed, it just calculates the force and angles and arc, and thanks to the engineering team for all that calculus, it just lands and nails that spot reliably, well then it's either going to cause the effect that they hoped that hit would do or not, but now they're in a more interesting decision space of either they're now back to step 1 of analyzing the puzzle that's partly demolished of, okay, well, my next hit's going to be from this side, or these are short puzzles, we're talking 10, 20, 30 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 throws max. So if it didn't have the intended effect, it barely moved it didn't cause a collapse, well, they restart the level, but now they have new information to apply to their next theory that, okay, well, that was the wrong place to hit it. Maybe next time I'll try it from over here or over there. And by analogy, if you picture a game, like if you think about what if Link's sword was hard to swing, if Chun-Li had a hard time just doing a normal punch, or if Lara Croft couldn't easily grab a ledge. These fundamental actions are the player's means of interacting with the universe and testing their ideas of I mean to go here, I mean to do that. They can still have a relevant dimension of interactivity on deciding the timing of it or where to do it, but if they can't reliably get a handle on what they intend to happen in the universe, it feels like you're driving with unresponsive steering wheel and pedals, which means you're just it's too loose, you're not in control, and you can't really learn and adapt from it. Even though Wii is long gone and few smartphone games use the sensors like this anymore, I think they're worried we're going to throw our phones or destroy televisions and launch them out the windows. These kind of design questions are absolutely back in VR gameplay, where people are trying to figure out how realistic or unrealistic should be hitting with an axe, shooting, different kind of maneuvers that we do with our hands and arms, and how much that should be auto-corrected or auto-aimed or compensated for. And the thing we ran into here for Boom Blox is basically that athletes spend their whole careers with coaches on how to better throw a punch, on how to better swing a bat, on how to do these very, very basic operations that are the core of those sports to even have a percentage chance of doing what they mean to do. But for a lot of games, certainly for the casual friendly style, as opposed to your arcade or your more simulation style, the fun of games is often that in half an hour or less, I can feel like a ninja or an NBA player. And so for us, it was still about a layer of mediation to figure out your intention of here's what you mean to do in the universe so we can execute on that. And realistic and demanding controls are going to limit a lot of players from being able to engage with the universe at a deeper level of strategy and decision making of what they intend to do because they're just struggling with the basic operation of I just wanted Mario to jump onto that platform. I can't make him do it. I give up. It looks like I'm back to the this version of the slides. So for system design, the real goal here was creating levels where the player could analyze it by, again, orbiting the camera around it. And the hope was that if someone's experienced at playing this, so that they have a pretty good mastery of how the blocks behave and how things move and how the throws work, they could see a puzzle they've never played before, recognize those blocks and how they're going to move and how heavy they are, and think, if I throw a ball there, this whole thing is going to be out in one shot, and just nail it. Because they have an accurate mental model internally for how the space is going to behave. Now, one of the challenges here is the engineering team, and I'm not faulting them, I think this was a wise choice on there, it required discipline on our part, gave us a lot of control to shoot ourselves in the foot. We had the control in our format to redefine for every single individual level the mass, the friction, the elasticity of any kind of block in that stage, which initially some designers were thinking about, hey, maybe we can do this for more visual flourish so that if you hit the puzzle in the right place, everything really goes wild and spins out of control and goes soaring off into space. And the problem with this is twofold. The first one is that it means that it's easier to solve it the way the designer intended for you to, but then it prevents you from being able to interact with it any other way, to solve it a different way. And part of the fun of these kind of environments, especially when it's physics-based puzzles, is the chance to solve it a different way than the designer assumed you would, thought you would, because you have an equally accurate grasp of, I know how heavy these blocks are, not suddenly having some wooden blocks be lighter, heavier, higher friction, more elastic than others. The inconsistency between stages also meant the player might feel frustrated, betrayed, or even worse, maybe kind of stupid, if they had expectations for how things should behave, and then they don't budge, because these blocks are secretly heavier, or those blocks secretly slide more or less than the other ones that they've seen like that, and that sort of can lead to a layer of frustration we could avoid. And again, this took discipline from our design side of coming up with a common standard definition of block properties. For the most part, we could share and import on stages, notwithstanding a few kind of isolated special exceptions. And the designing, so if you needed a heavier block, you made a bigger block. But proportional to its volume, it kept the same mass and other properties as other wood blocks. And though I don't think the team ultimately went this way in the time I was gone, if you needed a heavier block, if this was just some indie project or something, I would say use a different material to represent that's an iron block to communicate to the player that this is not going to behave like the other blocks with this material, texture, and so on. For novelty without confusion, threw a Disney map up here because part of what's wild about and impressive about these theme parks, they have so many rides and attractions and characters and stuff, but they're very nicely grouped into Fantasyland and Toontown and Tomorrowland and Adventureland in a way that literally a child can navigate it and say, I want to go to the castle. I want to go and see Buzz Lightyear or, the Avengers set or whatever. And this is important. This is tough for us because kids crave that novelty. They want new and different things, but we had so many different dimensions of what the goals are, how you interact with the space. We didn't want to overwhelm or lose them on feeling like they're frustrated because they didn't know what to do. And so the solve for this was that fortunately the art team produced a lot of different varieties of art themed setting backgrounds, right? So we have a castle area, we have kind of a Wild West, a Tiki Torch village, lots of different fun environments that were super different from each other. And even though the initial vision might have been, hey, we can have a variety of puzzles in every one of these, it really worked well to latch onto each one and say, okay, well, if it's a castle environment, that's where we're going to have the missions that are either attacking or defending a fortification. Maybe the camera doesn't even move because it's a very forward offensive kind of arrangement. If it's a Wild West environment, we had these mining stages. They had a high elastic ball, show some examples of, that kind of spiral through and you're trying to get all the gold. But what happened was it enabled us to give us this hook. So kids can see the setting, see the characters involved, and if they see the gorilla, they know, oh, this is one of those levels. I know how to do this one. I've done ones like this before. Meanwhile, the other side of that coin, if they see one they haven't seen and suddenly they're in a jungle level, they're in the volcano level, then they're going to kind of recognize, okay, well, this is something different than what I've seen before. I have to perk up my antenna and not come into this with the same assumptions as the last puzzle environment I was working in. Another nice thing about this, it enabled our lead writer on team, Joe Fielder. He's since has written for BioShock Infinite and Deathloop, which I think is just kind of a fun trivia bit. But Joe, hello Joe, I think he's also in Massachusetts where I am these days. It meant that he and the illustrators could work up these concepts so when they're setting up the characters to the players, they could very much communicate and express, when you see the gorilla, there's going to be bridges to help gorilla cross. And it just made it much, I think, clearer and simpler and more straightforward so we could still have a ton of variety in mechanics, a ton of different settings, a ton of different things the player got to do inside this game without getting lost or confused and disoriented in, I thought this was this kind of puzzle, but it's that kind of puzzle. I didn't know what to do here. Was just sort of, we very much feared was going to be an issue from the amount of complexity and variety we had. So another example of these that I had a lot of fun with, the volcano levels, which is a very precarious, hot environment with fireballs going off in the background and so on. We had these little baby gorillas in diapers, and you couldn't let them drop. You had to extract these gems, Jenga style, while the structure didn't fall too much, because if it collapsed, the little babies got squished. And it wasn't graphic, but it was kind of silly and cartoony. But when you saw these little babies, you knew, okay, this is going to be kind of a game of operation, kind of getting in there, doing these very precise maneuvers, which is obviously, again, antithetical to so many other missions where all about blow up the entire gem tower or that kind of thing. Likewise, again, we have a mission. We're helping a bandit in the Wild West do some mining in the gold or whatever. And so we built these tunnels with a 1 meter thick wall, 1 block thick wall that you could see inside and out what you hit, had holes on each side, and these super elastic balls. It would bounce probably 100 times like a laser ricochet. And you would just try to get a shallow angle in there to spiral it through, and you could see from the outside as they're ding, 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 points flying everywhere. Feels like you're winning a casino game or a slot machine, and it very much fit the Wild West theme, but it meant that when you saw this kind of environment, again, it helps the player shift gears to say, okay, I'm not trying to knock this down. I'm not trying to protect those baby gorillas. I've got a different context here with different characters and different clues in my environment that this is a different activity I'm about to engage in. For level grouping design, they were put in what we called stacks or sets, where each set of levels is maybe anywhere from 6, 9, 10, 12 levels, sometimes maybe, 18 perhaps on the upper bound. But the blocks were first introduced, I think it was a wise choice by the lead designer, Tomo Moriwaki, or creative director. Basically, before incorporating all those blocks in the more sophisticated levels featuring animals and creatures and characters, instead, first of all, they were taught as the chemical blocks levels, the vanishing block levels, the bomb blocks levels, so that the player could kind of first experiment with those in isolation, and then kind of we had that in our grammar to build upon and remix in these more sophisticated later stages. As a variety here for sort of a progression, we got for some Gorilla maps. Let me see if this one will full screen because this will make it easier to see. Nope. Okay, well, not playing nice today. Okay, so show, test, and combine was sort of the philosophy here for each of those stacks. So for, say, the bridge levels, we're helping Gorilla cross the bridge to get to her. I can't remember if it was like field trip students or children or nieces or nephews or what. But so the very first level was just a bridge where all the player could really do is clear the obstacle so that Gorilla could make their way across the bridge to the kids. Then we would elaborate on that, make a more advanced version only with that same concept. So here we see one that's watched some YouTube players play it a lot of different challenging ways. It's a lot of weight on top of the bridge that if you're not careful about how in the order you knock it off, imbalances and the whole thing collapses. Gorilla obviously can't get across. You got to restart. And then for the final section, the final third of those stages, we would elaborate and recombine with other concepts we taught them earlier. So they've already done chemical block stages and bomb block stages. So for the later stages of the bridge levels, we involved chemical blocks and bomb blocks. And you can just immediately get the gauge for how precarious this is as you're trying to knock things off without the green blocks touching, without the red blocks accidentally getting struck, which will detonate the entire bridge. Another set of Gorilla levels we have here, so they're all getting kind of bridge navigation themed. Here, Gorilla's powering their way through vanishing blocks one at a time, which kind of works as a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 timer. You can see the inevitable. This Gorilla is about to fall down that hole, and before the Gorilla can, you're trying to slide across these blocks to create a bridge for her to make her way down to the kids. Block pulled logs, some more intermediate levels for those. Basically had a lot of freestanding logs and then these metal contraptions that would hold them in place. And kind of a bit like trying to break open a lock, you have to slide these little puzzle pieces in a certain order to clear them so the bridge can fall and she can get to the kids in time. And this elaborated into these sort of stages where you might even see immediately this is a spiral of walls locking in the other walls, and the challenge there become almost sort of a mechanical, just click per minute kind of interaction. How fast can I swipe these accurately and correctly to clear the space to create this satisfying, clear walkway for her to save the kids? In terms of process, the game shipped with a really nice level editor on device on the Wii. People could actually make their own levels and locally play them. I can't recall how they shared them. There wasn't any network functionality. That was unfortunate. But that editor was created later in development. But more importantly, that editor worked on Wii with a Wiimote, which is like a couple buttons, a D-pad, a cursor, not a high-resolution screen. There's a lot faster ways to make levels with a keyboard, a mouse, and a high-res screen. So I made a custom level editor we used internally. I called it Vegan Edit. I'm vegan. Nothing else to do with veganism aside from the fact I built that editor. But the emphasis of my editor was really for expert use only, right? The users weren't going to see this. This was not meant for players, for anybody else. This is for people who are paid 8+ hours a day to crank out as many levels of high quality as they can. So it can have a very steep learning curve, but a lot of keyboard shortcuts to group select areas, rotate chunks of 3D, shift entire areas around, fill, replace, block types, goal types, etc. But that speed enabled me to achieve a degree of quality through quantity. And what I mean by that is my process most weeks involved Monday, Tuesday, rapidly sketching 12 to 15, just wildly different levels in a category. I've been assigned vanishing blocks, chemical blocks, bridge levels, whatever. And so I would just produce a variety in no particular order. They might be ugly, they might be confusing, but they're as different as I can make them, trying to explore the domain of what I could possibly do that's different or interesting with this kind of block or concept. On Wednesday, I would narrow down immediately. I'd throw away 1/3 of those levels, which 2/3 of those levels, leaving only 8 or 10, are even worth showing somebody else for review. The rest went straight to the trash. And that's what allowed me to take some wilder risks. I didn't count on every single idea I was trying had to turn into something shippable that I could show a producer or get into the final game. It just let me kind of off the wall spitball. I think writers or musicians sometimes call this writing for the waste paper basket. It was very helpful for me to have that freedom, making stuff knowing a lot of this is going to be trash, so I could really just kind of take chances on it. Thursday, I'd arrange having a coworker, either producer or another designer, playtest those, and of course, I wouldn't tell them what to do. I would just observe and make notes as they verbalized as they played. But before they did that, I would add some functional clues. I know Kevin before me mentioned affordance in design. Similar idea here. Physical clues in the environment to show them, okay, this block's protruding, or there's a hole there. Maybe I'm supposed to throw a ball in there. What if I try to hit that sideways? Trying to give them some clues of, here's some things that are going to have a disproportionate impact just structurally on what they're seeing, but not decorative yet. Not yet placing enemies and other things and obstacles just for the sake of visual flourish around it. Friday, based on those notes, I threw away another 2 levels, leaving behind only 6 to 8, and trashing another 2 that just weren't as interesting. And only then did I take the final pass to iterate on the decoration, the finalizing, and giving them a title as a clue. What I mean by a title as a clue is we knew, even though there's descriptions per level of what to do, a lot of people, especially younger players, casual players, we know skip that. So when possible, if they only read one thing, I figured it would be the mission title. So for example, a level called Magic Carpet is one in which the way you help Garilda across is you have to drag tiles under her as she's walking, and it's sort of this built-in clue or the gimmick per this stage and how you're going to go about it. For process for narrowing down which third of levels to trash each Wednesday, this is a process I've used throughout my career that's been very helpful to me. But basically, I would set up a spreadsheet where along the left side I'd have my different prototype levels, my 10, 15, 20 for that week I'd made so far. I'd make columns to score them a 1 to 5 on factors like how understandable do I think it is, how different or unique does it feel from the others, is it visually interesting to inspect from different angles, how big of a spectacle is the payoff for solving it. And even though it's just my subjective measures, my guessing, right? There's no objective rubric for what's a 3 versus a 4 or 5. It's an old technique actually used by many non-game people in investment firms, hospital administration. And what it's basically lets you do is it lets you think about what are the criteria that for one of these would make it more interesting to me or a better choice than another. How important are those to me? Because then I can weight those factors and say that this factor is worth double, triple, half as much as the other factors. Summing those and scoring those and then sorting by that score give me a way to say, okay, well, if I'm correct in transparently saying to myself, here's the important factors, here's how I think each map rates on those, then I can rule out among a big file of many considerations, all things considered, these third just don't have as much potential to work on, and so I could waste less time iterating on those and focus on the 2/3 that have better potential. Another thing to note here, right, is that it's possible that in the process you might find, well, I really wish this one had better score on it. At that point, just give it to yourself, right? If you find yourself modifying numbers to try to change the order, it's like the old thing about flipping a coin, and because you'll know by the time it lands which one you want, head or tails. Same trick here. At the end of the day, if it helps you come up with a clear decision, that's often sufficient. I have a YouTube video, it's not one of my viral ones, from 4 years ago explaining this gist of this process, how to make complex decisions better. And the process there is really the same thing applied to lots of designers I train. They have lots of different ideas they want to work on. Why would they pick one type instead of the others? And this is a way of kind of scoring and thinking through which is a good one for me to take on next based on their own personal criteria. So at a high level, we talked about mechanics, system design, novelty without confusion, level group design, and process. And actually, I think we still got a few more minutes. I'm just kind of skimming over here. We've got a couple other additional bits in closing I can just kind of throw in there. First of all, some designs we found were really more fun to make than to play, right? And this is where it was really designers having fun. One of my favorite things I did in there that nobody else cared about or liked, I watched YouTube videos of people playing these levels. They didn't even figure out they could do this. These little boxes in the background, they're actually chemical shotgun cannons, where when you pull out the wooden stick, it causes chemical blocks to collapse and touch. That explosion projects these little meter cubes, which just absolutely just trashes those zombies in front of these boxes. You're supposed to kind of use it to clear the ground behind Garilda. Nobody does it or cares. But I still kind of wrote this off, even if this to me wasn't maybe the most interesting level to the player, because it's a very internal, obtuse design choice we did. That they have the editor, I thought it was still valuable to be able to have some examples in there of, here's some neat tricks and other things, so you can build some working inventions and mechanics in this engine, and looking at their lens of, what are some things we can equip the player with in their vocabulary of stuff that might be relevant or have other interesting solutions to them in their editing experiences. 2 other short notes. Their credits policy was based on time on the team, not actual contributions. This to me was a very big frustration. I contributed at least proportionally to my size of size of that small design team, the number of levels and so on. But I did not stick around on the team. I was only for several months before I moved on to work with a startup. And so my credit was for additional design. And this was, of course, frustrating to me because I worked on a whole bunch of levels I was very proud of. And so since then, I've moved to a policy for our practice groups and home team where we have super detailed credits. I literally go through everybody's GitHub history for 140 plus games now. Who did which features and which levels and which sounds and which songs. And to me, that's been very important for players to be able to have a way to see in their games who did which parts, regardless of if they did it in a different amount of time than others. But anyway, that's become, for me, an important thing of an angle of credits, making hyper-specific credits in a way that GitHub makes very easy for us to do. And last, there's acknowledging that best practices depend on context. This one of the points of just friction and Avid, one of it blaming anybody at all, was that a lot of processes for established genres like RTS or FPS, we have a 200, 300 person team trying to make a slightly more polished version of this well-established, amazing, high-quality game, is a very different set of processes or hierarchy than might be well-suited to a smaller, more agile, more innovative team on a smaller timeline. And so a lot of what I've kind of figured out in my approach to teaching people is the differences between, obviously, what's right and wrong matches for your game jam may not be best for a giant team and anywhere in between, depending on what you're building, how you're going about it. A good engineering practice is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Same thing goes for design approach and so on, where if what you're building might get thrashed and trashed out, you don't want to spend too long perfecting it or painting yourself into a corner. But that's it. Looks like we're kind of near the end of time, but if anybody has questions or things, happy to discuss. I guess it would be the GGA Discord. And one last little quick plug here, if you're interested in my kind of stuff, GameDevTraining.com is a free weekly email list where you can catch some other tips from people I've trained.
Yeah, everyone, write down GameDevTraining.com. Great stuff. I'll put it in the chat in a little bit. Thank you very much. That was a lot of great information. Definitely agree with you on the credits, especially, and definitely agree with you that level design processes within a team. Let's focus on you. Get your face up there, not my icon. There we go. That it varies significantly. So one thing I'll notice is that on larger teams, and you didn't seem to have this, is there will always, not to say always, there will often be a team that reviews the level design plans before they go into production. And it seems like you had full choice of what you developed or didn't develop.
Yeah, this is, I mean, so for example, in contrast, the Medal of Honor Airborne team I was on before it, there was absolutely, like, we would have to draw stuff in Illustrator and have meetings about it and committees together about, like, which stages are we attempting to do sniping in the winter mountains? Are we going to this concrete base pillars of whatever? Whereas here, like, the levels are so small, instead it was actually, like, if you could talk about it all day and you wouldn't be able to picture it until you had it working on device, but it was so fast to build and throw together those stages, it just became a matter of, like, okay, let's put it in front of the producer. What do you think about this? No? Okay, what about this one over here? And it was, again, that's why I think it was almost more of an indie kind of process, despite being a AAA title, in a way really unique to that point in time and that platform that was a lot of fun to work on, really neat opportunity to be a part of. Again, a lot of great people on that project, but just a very different process than what normally fits for a giant company like Activision, Ubisoft, EA's approach to level design process.
Right. And you still probably sought out feedback every now and again, but it's good to be able to go with your gut instincts on it. Morris Taylor raised the question on credits. Commercial games that show full credits might get employees poached. So, Morris, our response to this is, number one, LinkedIn. They're up there anyway. Number two, if they're getting poached, that is the company's fault. So that is a good indication to a developer. If it's a studio that doesn't want to show you in the credits, there is a problem going on. I think that the more successful studios make sure to share it. I list everybody in the credits. Now, Chris is a bit more granular on what he credits them for doing, but I'll put them in there.
I also think Morris is totally correct, right? And so, for example, you look at the credits for Photoshop, it's just a pile of names. They don't even say who's a programmer or who's doing UI, UX, or whatever, because they really don't want you to go get the person who did a certain filter, certain technique, content-aware fill. They don't want you to know. In my home team game dev training group, like, we want people poached. We're just a training group, so we would love for someone to go after whoever made that model, did that level. So we do have a different set of criteria. But if nothing else, right, college projects, certainly freeware projects, game jams, I think the same philosophy can definitely apply for credit people for what they modeled, what levels they did, what sounds they did. At the end of the day, their friends, family, recruiters, what everybody wants to know is, what did you do?
Right. And one of the things that you'll see is people put up their work on their portfolios when they have permission, and everybody else on the team is going through there and is going to slam them if they're taking credit for stuff they didn't do. Mm-hmm. So there is a bit of self-regulation going on, especially for larger teams.
Absolutely. But yeah, I realize we're kind of already over time in the next section, so I guess I'll split if we're ready for the next.
All right. Thank you very much. Chris DeLeon, much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.